My name is Dominic Harper, 67 years old, retired construction worker from Montana. 3 months ago, my wealthy brother Harold passed away unexpectedly, leaving me his historic Rocking H Ranch, 300 heads of prize cattle, and $14 million in the bank. I was still processing this life-changing inheritance when my son Jackson showed up at the ranch gates. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years after a bitter falling out. The moment he stepped out of his luxury SUV, I knew he wasn't here to reconnect. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear how I handled my greedy son with help from a lawyer and police officer who showed up just in time. Before everything changed, I lived a simple life that I had carved out for myself after 42 years of pouring concrete, framing houses, and building the infrastructure of 3 different Montana towns. My hands were calloused, my back perpetually sore, but I took pride in seeing my work standing strong in the communities I helped build. Home was a modest 2-bedroom house on the east side of Billings. Nothing fancy, just 1,200 square feet, with a small yard and a covered porch where I would sit most evenings, watching the neighborhood kids play while nursing a cold beer. I had paid off the mortgage 5 years before retiring, which gave me a sense of security despite my limited pension. My daily routine was predictable but comfortable. I would wake at 5:30 every morning out of habit, even though I no longer needed to get to a job site. By 6:15, I would be at the Morning Star Diner where Doris would have my coffee and wheat toast ready without me having to order. The other regulars and I would discuss everything from weather patterns to local politics, solving the world's problems 1 cup of coffee at a time. 3 days a week, I volunteered at the Veterans Center, helping with maintenance and repairs. Most of those guys served in Vietnam or the Gulf, and they appreciated having someone who could fix leaky faucets and patch drywall without charging an arm and a leg. The gratitude in their eyes was payment enough for me. Meanwhile, my older brother Harold was living a completely different life 90 miles away in Wyoming. While I had worked with my hands building structures for others, Harold had built a cattle empire. The Rocking H Ranch started with 50 acres and 10 head of cattle he purchased when he was 25. By the time he was 60, it had grown to over 2,000 acres with some of the finest Angus breeding stock in the state. We stayed in touch with monthly phone calls and holiday visits, but our lives were worlds apart. Harold drove a new pickup truck every 2 years and wore custom boots that cost more than my monthly pension. I drove a 20-year-old Ford and bought my work boots on clearance at the farm supply store. But there was never any jealousy between us. Harold worked hard for everything he had, and I respected that. My own financial situation was always tight, especially after retiring. My construction pension and Social Security covered the basics, but there was never much left over. When my back went out last year, the medical bills ate through what little savings I had managed to put aside. I started taking on small handyman jobs around the neighborhood just to make ends meet, though my doctor warned against the strain on my already damaged spine. As for family, that was a complicated subject. My marriage to Amanda fell apart 15 years ago after 23 years together. The divorce wasn't particularly nasty, just sad and filled with the quiet realization that we had grown into different people. She remarried 3 years later to a dentist from Tampa and moved to Florida, where she seemed happy based on the Christmas cards she still sent. Our only child, Jackson, took his mother's side during the divorce, though I never understood why. He was already an adult at 28 when we split, working in finance in Chicago. Perhaps he simply found it easier to blame me, or maybe Amanda had painted me as the villain in their private conversations. Whatever the reason, our relationship deteriorated rapidly after the divorce. The last time I saw Jackson in person was at Amanda's second wedding. What should have been a civil conversation turned into a heated argument when he accused me of never being ambitious enough to give his mother the life she deserved. His words cut deep, but instead of explaining myself, I stormed off. Pride is a terrible thing sometimes. We exchanged a few terse phone calls after that, but by the time he turned 30, all communication had stopped completely. For the past decade, I filled the family void with my small circle of friends and community connections. There was Bill from the hardware store who would invite me over for barbecues, Maria from church who would bring me soup when I was under the weather, and the guys from my former construction crew who would meet up monthly for beers and reminiscing. It wasn't the family life I had once dreamed of, but it was enough to keep the loneliness at bay most days. Still, there were moments when the silence in my little house was deafening. Holidays were the worst. I would sometimes find myself looking at old photo albums, tracing the smiling face of my son as a boy, and wondering what kind of man he had become. I sent birthday cards faithfully every year to his last known address, never knowing if they were received or simply tossed away unopened. Harold was my only remaining blood relative, or so I thought. Despite the geographical distance between us, knowing he was there, just a phone call away, provided a comfort I never fully appreciated until it was gone. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April, while I was fixing a loose cabinet hinge in my kitchen. The hospital administrator had a gentle voice that somehow made the devastating news even more surreal. Harold had suffered a massive heart attack while checking fence lines on the east pasture. One of his ranch hands found him too late. My brother was gone at 69, just 2 years older than me. I sat on my kitchen floor for what felt like hours, the screwdriver still clutched in my hand. Harold had always seemed invincible to me, larger than life with his booming laugh and endless energy. The thought of him being gone created a hollowness in my chest that I had never experienced before, not even during my divorce. The drive to Wyoming the next day was a blur of memories. Every mile triggered another recollection of our shared childhood. Fishing in the creek behind our parents' small farm, Harold teaching me to ride my first horse, the two of us sneaking cigarettes in the hayloft. We had been inseparable as boys, before life and different ambitions pulled us in separate directions. Pulling up to the Rocking H Ranch for the funeral, I was struck anew by the sheer scale of what Harold had built. The main house was a sprawling ranch-style home with a wraparound porch and large picture windows overlooking rolling pastures. Dozens of expensive vehicles lined the long driveway, belonging to business associates and cattle buyers who had come to pay their respects. The funeral itself was well attended, with over 200 people crowded into the small church in town. I sat in the front row alone, listening to person after person share stories about my brother, some of which I had never heard before. It struck me how little I actually knew about Harold's daily life, despite our regular calls. These people spoke of his business acumen, his generosity to the community, his mentorship of young ranchers. They knew a side of my brother I had only glimpsed. During the reception afterward, I felt like an outsider despite being the closest living relative in the room. Men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses offered condolences while subtly assessing me in my off-the-rack dark blue suit that I had last worn to a construction company retirement dinner 5 years ago. I overheard whispered questions. "That is Harold's brother? The construction worker?" Their surprise at our different lifestyles was thinly veiled. After most guests had departed, a tall, silver-haired man approached me. He introduced himself as Franklin Williams, Harold's attorney and friend for the past 20 years. "Mr. Harper, when you have a moment, Harold left some instructions that we should discuss," he said, handing me his business card. "Perhaps you could come by my office tomorrow morning?" The following day, I arrived at the impressive law offices of Williams and Associates in the center of town. The receptionist immediately ushered me into a large corner office where Franklin was waiting with a thick folder on his desk. "Please take a seat, Dominic," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. "I know this is a difficult time, but Harold was very specific about his wishes. What came next changed the trajectory of my life completely." Franklin explained that contrary to what many expected, Harold had left the entire Rocking H Ranch operation, all assets, and his personal fortune to me, his only brother. "But that must be a mistake," I protested, leaning forward in disbelief. "Harold knew I don't know the first thing about ranching. Surely he meant to leave it to his foreman or business partners." Franklin smiled and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Harold anticipated your reaction. He asked me to give you this letter." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the pages covered in my brother's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Dom, if you're reading this, Then I've gone and done the inconsiderate thing of dying on you. I'm sorry for that. There's never a good time, is there? I've left you everything I have, which might come as a shock. Let me explain why. Throughout our lives, people have seen me as the successful brother because of the wealth I accumulated. But you and I both know that true success isn't measured in dollars. You built a life of integrity and hard work. You created things with your hands that will outlast both of us. While I was accumulating wealth, you were accumulating something far more valuable: respect, genuine friendships, and a clear conscience. The Rocking H isn't just land and cattle. It's a legacy our grandfather started and our father continued. I always regretted that I had no children to pass it to, but now I realize the perfect person has been there all along. You may not know ranching yet, but you know about hard work and doing things right. Hank Butler, my foreman, has been with me for 30 years. He knows every inch of this place and will help you. Trust him. The ranch hands are good people who deserve good leadership. This place deserves someone who will love it not for what it's worth, but for what it is. That's you, brother. With love and faith, Harold. I couldn't speak for several minutes after reading the letter. Franklin waited patiently, pushing a box of tissues across the desk that I hadn't realized I needed. There are some practical matters we should discuss, Franklin eventually said, opening the folder. The ranch encompasses 2,300 acres of prime grazing land, with an additional 800 acres leased from the state. There are approximately 300 head of prize breeding stock, plus another 400 commercial cattle. The numbers were staggering. Franklin continued explaining the financial aspects. $14 million in various investment and bank accounts, the ranch equipment and vehicles, the historic main house that had been built in 1920, and several other outbuildings and staff quarters. It's a significant operation, Dominic, but a well-organized one. Harold ran a tight ship. As the reality sank in, my emotions cycled between grief for my brother, gratitude for his faith in me, and overwhelming anxiety about the responsibility now resting on my shoulders. I had spent my life building things for other people. Now, suddenly, I was responsible for maintaining something monumental that someone else had built. What if I can't do this, Franklin? What if I fail and ruin everything Harold worked for? The fear in my voice was impossible to hide. Harold considered that possibility, Franklin replied. He said you would doubt yourself, because that's who you are. But he never doubted you for a second. As I drove back to the ranch that afternoon, my mind raced with practical concerns. I knew how to fix a fence, but I knew nothing about cattle breeding programs or agricultural tax laws or managing a staff of ranch hands. My construction experience had taught me to solve problems methodically, but this felt like being asked to build a skyscraper after only constructing garden sheds. The sign at the entrance to the property read Rocking H Ranch, Est, 1,907 inches wrought iron letters. As I drove past it, the weight of history and responsibility pressed down on me. This wasn't just any ranch. It was a historic property that had survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless droughts and harsh winters. Now its future rested in my inexperienced hands. That first night alone in the ranch house was surreal. The master bedroom where I now slept had a king-sized bed that made my queen back home seem like a cot. Family photos lined the hallway walls, including several of Harold and me as children, our arms thrown casually around each other's shoulders, gap-toothed grins facing the camera. Had he looked at these every day? The thought made my chest tighten with renewed grief. Sleep eluded me, so at dawn I made a pot of coffee and stepped onto the porch just as the sun was beginning to illuminate the vast property. In the distance, I could see cattle grazing, small dark shapes against the golden morning light. This was mine now, all of it. At 6:30 sharp, a weathered pickup truck pulled up to the house, and a man who looked to be in his late 50s climbed out. He wore a worn Stetson, faded jeans, and boots that had clearly seen years of honest work. This had to be Hank Butler, the foreman Harold had mentioned in his letter. "Mr. Harper," he said with a nod as he approached the porch. "Thought I should come by and see if you wanted to get acquainted with the operation. Please, call me Dominic, I replied, extending my hand. And I'd appreciate that more than you know. I'm completely out of my depth here. A faint smile crossed his tanned, lined face. Harold mentioned you were a straight shooter. That's a good start. He wasn't effusive, but there was a solid dependability about him that I immediately appreciated. Over the next several hours, Hank drove me around the vast property in his pickup, pointing out the different pastures, the calving barns, equipment sheds, and the bunkhouse where some of the younger ranch hands lived. I met about a dozen workers, all of whom regarded me with polite curiosity. I couldn't blame them. Their livelihoods now depended on a complete novice. These men been with the ranch anywhere from 2 to 25 years, Hank explained as we continued our tour. Good workers, all of them. Harold paid fair wages and treated everyone right. I plan to continue that, I assured him, making mental notes of everything he was telling me. Hank's initial skepticism was evident in his reserved manner and careful explanations, as though speaking to a child. But as the morning progressed, and I asked practical questions based on my construction experience about water systems and building maintenance, his demeanor subtly shifted. "You know your way around infrastructure," he commented, as I examined a water pump system and identified the likely cause of a pressure issue they'd been experiencing. "Different application, same principles," I replied. "Though I know that doesn't apply to the actual ranching part." "You'll learn," he said simply. It wasn't effusive encouragement, but coming from Hank, it felt significant. That afternoon, I spent hours in Harold's office, going through his meticulously kept records. My brother may have been a rancher, but he was also a shrewd businessman. Every ledger was perfectly balanced, every transaction documented. Breeding records showed the careful genetic planning that had gone into developing his award-winning Angus line. Land management logs detailed pasture rotation schedules and conservation efforts. Among the business files, I found a box of personal items, old photographs, letters, newspaper clippings about the ranch's successes over the years. One photo in particular caught my eye. Harold standing proudly beside a massive bull that had apparently won some prestigious competition. The joy on his face was unmistakable. Had I ever felt that kind of pride in my own accomplishments? As the days passed, I began to establish a routine. Early mornings, with Hank learning the operational aspects of the ranch. Afternoons going through paperwork and financials. Evenings sitting on the porch trying to absorb everything I'd learned. The sheer complexity of the cattle business was staggering. It wasn't just about raising animals. It was about genetics, nutrition, market timing, land management, staff coordination, and 100 other details I had never considered. My first week brought unexpected challenges. A section of fence broke in the north pasture, allowing several valuable breeding heifers to wander onto neighboring property. A newborn calf developed a respiratory infection and required round-the-clock care. The hay baler broke down right before an important cutting. Each crisis was a test, and while I couldn't contribute much ranching knowledge, I found my practical problem-solving skills were valuable. I helped repair the fence using techniques from my construction days that Hank admitted were more durable than their usual quick fixes. I stayed up through the night with the veterinarian treating the sick calf, following instructions precisely and earning a grudging nod of approval. And years of maintaining construction equipment gave me enough mechanical knowledge to help diagnose the baler issue, saving thousands in repair costs. By the end of that first week, I made an important discovery while examining the ranch's water system. The main house, barns, and pastures were supplied by an elaborate pump system that Harold had been paying a specialist to maintain at great expense. After tracing the entire setup, I realized the recurring pressure problems were caused by a fundamental design flaw that could be fixed permanently. "Been dealing with that issue for 7 years, Hank said, shaking his head as I showed him my diagram of the proposed solution. Harold threw money at it, but nobody ever figured out the root cause. With Hank's help, we implemented my redesign over 2 days, and for the first time, the ranch had consistent water pressure everywhere. It was a small victory, but an important one. That evening, I noticed a few of the ranch hands nodding to me with new respect as I walked by. Slowly, I was beginning to understand what Harold had seen in me. My brother had built an empire with vision and business acumen. What it needed now was someone who could maintain it with practical knowledge and attention to detail. Perhaps I did have something valuable to contribute after all. The ranch staff began sharing stories about Harold, small anecdotes about his generosity, his occasional hot temper, his unfailing fairness. Through their words, I got to know my brother in a new way, filling in the gaps of the years we had spent focused on our separate lives. There was a strange comfort in these stories, as though Harold was still present in the collective memory of this place he had built. As the second week began, I was still overwhelmed but no longer paralyzed by it. I had started to develop a vision for honoring Harold's legacy, while gradually implementing improvements where my experience could add value. The ranch wasn't just a business, it was a community, an ecosystem, a living monument to my brother's life work. Preserving that became my mission, even as I wondered if I was truly the right person for the job. I had no idea that my commitment to this mission would soon be severely tested by someone I never expected to see again. It was a clear Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after I had taken over the ranch, when Hank radioed me from the main gate. "Dominic, there's someone here you might want to come meet personally." His voice crackled through the walkie-talkie, an unusual edge in his typically steady tone. I was helping repair a tractor in the equipment barn and had grease up to my elbows, but something in Hank's voice made me clean up quickly and drive down to the entrance in one of the ranch ATVs. As I approached the gate, I saw a black Lincoln Navigator with Chicago rental plates idling on the other side. My heart nearly stopped when the driver's door opened, and my son Jackson stepped out. At 38, he looked more like a stranger than the young man I remembered. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and the watch on his wrist gleamed expensively in the afternoon sunday. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Dad," he finally said, taking a tentative step forward. "It's been a long time, 10 years and 47 days to be exact." Not that I had been counting. "Jackson," I managed, my voice rougher than intended. "This is unexpected." His face broke into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I heard about Uncle Harold. I'm so sorry for your loss." He moved forward and embraced me stiffly, a gesture that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. "And then I heard about the inheritance." "That's quite something, Dad." Of course he had heard about the money. Why else would he be here after a decade of silence? "I thought you might need some help," he continued, gesturing to the passenger side of the SUV where a woman was now emerging. She was younger than Jackson, probably early 30s, blonde and stunning in an artificial way that seemed out of place against the natural backdrop of the ranch. "This is my wife, Natalie. We got married last year." A marriage I hadn't been invited to, or even informed about. "Nice to meet you," Natalie said, her eyes sweeping past me to take in the sprawling ranch house visible in the distance. "Jackson has told me so much about you." I doubted that very much. Hank stood silently by the gate, watching the interaction with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I could feel his protective presence like a solid wall at my back. "Why don't you come up to the house?" I offered, unable to think of a polite alternative. "We can talk there." As they followed me in their SUV, I radioed ahead to Maria, the housekeeper, asking her to prepare some coffee. My mind was racing with questions and suspicions. After 10 years of complete silence, Jackson shows up within weeks of my inheriting significant wealth? The timing wasn't subtle. In the grand living room of the ranch house, Jackson made a dramatic show of emotion, looking at family photos and commenting on memories that I suspected were largely manufactured for the occasion. Natalie, meanwhile, moved through the space like she was conducting a silent appraisal, her eyes lingering on antiques and artwork. "So, Dad," Jackson finally said, settling into a leather armchair with practiced ease, $14 million, and all this land. "That's quite a change from your little house in Billings." The directness of his approach was almost refreshing. No pretense, straight to the money. "It's been an adjustment," I replied carefully. I'm learning the ranching business day by day. That's actually why we're here. Jackson leaned forward earnestly. You won't be able to handle all this alone. Running a ranch this size is a complex business operation. With my financial background, I could help manage the assets, investments, maybe even grow the operation. There it was. Not even 30 minutes into our reunion, and he was already positioning himself to get his hands on Harold's money. I appreciate the offer, but Harold left a great team in place. Hank has been managing the daily operations for decades. Jackson waved this away dismissively. Ranch hands are great for physical work, Dad, but this is a multi-million-dollar business. You need someone with actual financial expertise. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling. I've already looked into some investment opportunities that could significantly increase your returns. Your returns, you mean? I thought, but didn't say. Over the next hour, Jackson outlined his vision for the ranch, which seemed to involve selling off significant portions of land for development, reducing the breeding stock to cut costs, and investing the bulk of the liquid assets in various schemes that would supposedly yield higher returns. All of these ideas ran counter to everything Harold had built and valued. We could even bring in a management company for the day-to-day operations, he continued, oblivious to my growing discomfort. Free you up to enjoy your retirement. After all, at your age, you shouldn't be working so hard. Natalie, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly spoke up. This house has such potential. The decor is a bit dated, but with some modernization, it could be featured in magazines. By late afternoon, Jackson had announced his intention to help by staying for a few weeks. Before I could formulate a polite refusal, Natalie was already discussing which guest room had the best view and asking about internet speeds for Jackson's work. That evening, after they had settled into the East Wing guest suite, I sat on the porch with a much-needed glass of whiskey. Hank joined me silently, taking the adjacent chair. "Known your son long?" he asked after a few minutes of companionable silence. The question caught me off guard until I realized Hank had picked up on the estrangement immediately. "Not for the past 10 years, I admitted. We had a falling out." Hank nodded sagely. "Funny how inheritance brings family out of the woodwork. He claims he wants to help. I bet he does." Hank took a sip of his own whiskey. "Harold dealt with people like that too. Folks see money and land. They start circling like vultures. He's still my son," I said, though the defense felt hollow even to my own ears. "Just be careful, Dominic. I've worked this land for 30 years. Seen a lot of smooth talkers come and go." With that, Hank stood and bid me good night, leaving me alone with my thoughts and growing unease. Over the next few days, Jackson began inserting himself into ranch operations with alarming speed. He criticized my management decisions, scheduled meetings with cattle buyers without consulting me or Hank, and constantly talked about modernizing and optimizing, as though the ranch was an underperforming corporation rather than a historic working farm. Natalie, meanwhile, had already contacted an interior designer about updating the main house, completely disregarding the historical significance of the original fixtures and furnishings that Harold had carefully preserved. 5 days after their arrival, I walked into Harold's office late at night to retrieve some paperwork, and found Jackson going through the financial files, documents spread across the desk. "Just trying to get a handle on the overall financial picture," he explained, without a hint of embarrassment at being caught. "Some of these investment vehicles are severely underperforming. We could easily increase returns by 7 to 10% annually with some reallocations." That same night, unable to sleep, I overheard Jackson on the phone in the hallway, his voice low but intense. "It's taking longer than expected," he was saying. "The old man is more attached to this place than we anticipated. No, I can't just ask him to sign everything over yet. I need more time to convince him that he's in over his head. Yes, I know how much we need this. Trust me, I'm working on it." My heart sank as the last shred of hope that Jackson might have genuine intentions evaporated. The son I had longed to reconnect with hadn't come back at all. In his place was a stranger wearing my son's face, calculating the quickest way to claim what was never his to begin with. The next morning, Jackson announced at breakfast that he and Natalie were extending their stay indefinitely. "You need us, Dad," he said with that same insincere smile. "This place is just too much for someone without experience to handle alone." As I looked into the eyes of my only child, I saw no love, no genuine concern, not even respect, just cold calculation and the reflection of dollar signs. It was time to make some decisions about how to handle this situation before I lost not only my relationship with my son, but everything Harold had entrusted to me. Without asking permission, Jackson and Natalie moved their belongings from the guest suite to the larger east wing of the house, which contained 3 bedrooms and a private sitting area. "We need space to set up a proper office," Jackson explained when I questioned the move. "I've got calls with clients and investors. Can't do that from a tiny guest room." Clients and investors. As though he was doing me a favor by conducting his own business from my home. Within days, furniture began to be rearranged. Harold's comfortable, worn leather armchair disappeared from the living room, replaced by a sleek, modern monstrosity that Natalie had ordered online. Family photos were moved to less prominent positions to make way for abstract artwork that clashed with the ranch's rustic character. "We're just freshening the place up a bit," Natalie explained when she caught my frown. "This decor is so 1,990 seconds. Trust me, you'll love it once it's all done." I didn't have the heart to tell her that many pieces she dismissed as outdated were family heirlooms, dating back to my grandparents' time, carefully preserved by Harold to maintain the ranch's connection to its history. Meanwhile, Jackson was making his presence felt in the business operations. Without consulting me, he scheduled meetings with 3 different cattle buyers, attempting to negotiate the sale of 20 prize breeding bulls that formed the cornerstone of Harold's carefully developed genetic line. "These animals are just sitting here consuming resources," he argued when I confronted him. "They're worth more as immediate capital that we can reinvest." "Those bulls represent years of selective breeding," I explained, trying to keep my temper in check. "They're not meant for immediate sale. They're an investment in the ranch's future." Jackson rolled his eyes like I was a child who didn't understand basic math. "Dad, you're thinking like a small-time operator. This ranch needs to be run like the business it is." His condescension cut deep, but I swallowed my pride and tried another approach. "Harold had specific plans for those bulls. I want to honor his vision." "Uncle Harold is gone," Jackson said bluntly. "And with all due respect, his methods were becoming outdated. The cattle industry is changing, and this ranch needs to change with it." What Jackson didn't know, or chose to ignore, was that Harold's outdated methods had made the Rocking H one of the most respected breeding operations in 3 states. His commitment to quality over quantity, to sustainable practices, and to genetic improvement had built a reputation that allowed him to command premium prices. One evening, I returned from checking fence lines with Hank to find Natalie in the living room with a middle-aged woman who was taking measurements and photographs. "This is Stephanie, my interior designer," Natalie introduced her casually. "We're discussing a full renovation. This wood paneling has got to go, and these floors need updating to something more contemporary." "This is a historic home," I objected, my patience wearing thin. "The paneling is original red oak from the 1,920 seconds. Stephanie looked between us awkwardly as Natalie waved away my concerns. "History is nice, but livability is more important. Nobody wants to feel like they're living in a museum." Harold had loved this house exactly as it was, preserving its character while carefully updating only what was necessary for modern comfort. The thought of it being gutted and modernized felt like a desecration of his memory. That same evening, Jackson brought in a man he introduced as my financial advisor, Greg, without prior warning. Over dinner, Greg presented what he called tax optimization strategies that sounded suspiciously like ways to move assets from the ranch into various trusts and holding companies that would be jointly controlled. "The current structure leaves you vulnerable to excessive estate taxation," Greg explained smoothly. "By redistributing these assets into properly structured entities, we protect the long-term value." I might not have Jackson's financial education, but I had enough common sense to recognize a scheme designed to dilute my control over the ranch. "I'll have Franklin review any proposed changes," I said, referring to Harold's longtime attorney. "He knows the ranch's legal structure inside and out." A flash of annoyance crossed Jackson's face. "Franklin is a small-town lawyer stuck in the past. Greg works with high-net-worth clients across the country." "Nevertheless," I insisted, "no changes without Franklin's review." The tension in the house grew palpable. Jackson began holding meetings with potential investors in the living room without informing me who they were or what was being discussed. Natalie complained constantly about the poor cell service and lack of high-end shopping options nearby. Both treated the ranch staff with barely concealed disdain. "Your foreman lacks vision," Jackson remarked after Hank opposed his idea to sell off 100 acres for a luxury housing development. "He's holding this place back." "Hank has forgotten more about ranching than you'll ever know," I replied, my temper finally showing. "He helped build this place alongside Harold. His judgment matters to me." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "I see he's gotten to you. Dad, you can't let sentimentality cloud your business judgment. This place could be worth twice as much with the right management approach. It's not about maximizing value, Jackson. It's about respecting what this place means and what it stands for." 1 month into their unwelcome stay, matters came to a head when Jackson suggested laying off 4 of the most experienced ranch hands to streamline operations. "They're redundant positions," he insisted. "We're paying premium wages for work that could be consolidated." The confrontation that followed was heated enough that Natalie made herself scarce, and several ranch hands pretended not to hear the raised voices coming from the office. That night, after the argument, I experienced a sharp, crushing pain in my chest while climbing the stairs to my bedroom. The sensation was so intense that I had to sit down, struggling to breathe as sweat beaded on my forehead. Jackson found me there 20 minutes later, still trying to recover. Despite our differences, genuine concern flashed across his face as he helped me to my room and called the local doctor, an older man named Dr. Phillips who had been Harold's physician for years. After an examination and an EKG, Dr. Phillips concluded it was likely an anxiety attack rather than a heart issue, though he recommended following up with additional tests to be safe. "Your blood pressure is elevated," he noted. "Have you been under unusual stress lately?" Before I could answer, Jackson jumped in. "He's been working himself too hard, doctor, trying to run this whole ranch despite having no experience. I've been telling him to let me handle more of the business side." After Dr. Phillips left, Jackson's momentary genuine concern transformed into a new angle of attack. "This proves what I've been saying, Dad. You're not well enough to handle all this. The stress is literally killing you. Sign over management authority to me, and you can relax and enjoy your retirement as you should be doing." Even in my weakened state, I recognized the manipulation. "I'll be fine, Jackson. Just need some rest." But the incident gave Jackson new ammunition. Over the next few days, I overheard him telling ranch hands that I was not well and implying that he would soon need to take over management for my father's health. He made similar comments to Harold's business associates and even to some neighbors who called to check on me after hearing rumors of my heart attack. The situation reached a crisis point when Hank pulled me aside one morning with disturbing news. "Dominic, we've got a problem. 8 of our prize-breeding heifers were loaded onto trailers yesterday and taken off the property. Jackson told the hands it was for a livestock show in Casper, but there's no show scheduled. I called around, and word is they were sold to a buyer from Idaho." My blood ran cold. "He had no authority to make that sale." Hank nodded grimly. "I know that, and you know that. But he's your son, and he's been throwing his weight around like he owns the place. The younger hands don't know who to listen to anymore." Later that same day, while searching for some documents in the office, I made a discovery that confirmed my worst fears. Jackson had left his laptop open, and on the screen was a partially completed set of property transfer documents that would effectively give him control over the ranch's operations and a significant portion of its assets. All they needed was my signature. That night, I made a decision. Blood might be thicker than water, but there are limits to what family ties can justify. It was time to reclaim what Harold had entrusted to me, even if it meant confronting my own son in a way I had never imagined would be necessary. The next morning, I made a private call to Franklin Williams from my truck, parked well away from the main house. What he told me about the legal protections Harold had already put in place gave me both comfort and the courage to take the next step. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about honoring my brother's legacy and the community that depended on the ranch for their livelihoods. 2 days after my call to Franklin, I arranged to meet him at the Morning Glory Diner in town, far from any prying eyes or ears at the ranch. The small booth in the back corner provided just enough privacy for the sensitive conversation we needed to have. "I suspected something like this might happen," Franklin said after I detailed Jackson's actions over the past weeks. "Harold was concerned about potential opportunists emerging after his death, though I don't think he anticipated it would be your own son." "What can I do, Franklin? He's systematically trying to take control of everything. He's already sold cattle without authorization, and I found transfer documents on his computer." Franklin leaned forward, his expression serious. "Harold built in protections precisely for this kind of situation. The inheritance came with specific conditions that would be triggered by any attempt to transfer or sell major assets without proper authorization." He pulled out a folder containing documents with Harold's signature. "These stipulate that any unauthorized sale of breeding stock or attempt to transfer property control would immediately invoke a trust provision requiring all major decisions to go through a management committee for the next 5 years." I felt a surge of gratitude for my brother's foresight, mixed with sadness that he had needed to plan for such betrayal. "But how do I prove what Jackson is doing? He's careful to do things when I'm not around, and he's been turning some of the staff against me by claiming I'm not well enough to manage things." Franklin considered this for a moment. "We need documentation, concrete evidence of unauthorized sales or document tampering. Can you get access to his laptop again, or any paperwork showing the cattle sales?" "Possibly, but he's become more secretive recently." "Then we need to set a trap," Franklin said, a determined glint in his eye. "And I know just the person to help us. Sheriff Cooper is an old friend of Harold's. If we can document enough evidence of potential fraud, he can make this an official matter." Over the next 3 days, I implemented our plan carefully. With Hank's help, I installed discreet security cameras in the ranch office and main house common areas. Nothing in bedrooms or bathrooms, of course, just public spaces where business would be conducted. I also began keeping a detailed log of all of Jackson's actions and conversations related to ranch business. Meanwhile, Franklin quietly contacted the buyers of the cattle Jackson had sold, obtaining copies of the sales documents that clearly showed Jackson had misrepresented his authority, forging my signature in some cases. By the end of the week, we had compiled enough evidence to move forward. Franklin arranged for Sheriff Cooper to accompany him to the ranch under the pretext of needing to review some legal details of the inheritance with me. When they arrived on Saturday morning, Jackson was initially pleased, assuming the meeting was about finalizing some aspect of the inheritance that might benefit him. He put on a show of being the devoted son, offering coffee and speaking affectionately about how he was just trying to help Dad manage this overwhelming responsibility. Once we were all seated in the living room, with Natalie hovering nearby pretending to read a magazine while clearly eavesdropping, Franklin cleared his throat and began. "I've asked Sheriff Cooper to join us today because some concerning issues have come to light regarding ranch operations over the past month." Jackson's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of issues?" "Specifically," I said, "finding strength in Franklin's supportive presence, the unauthorized sale of 8 breeding heifers to Westlake Farms in Idaho 3 days ago." "That was a strategic business decision," Jackson replied smoothly. "Those animals weren't part of the core breeding program and were underperforming asset-wise. Those heifers were central to next year's breeding program," I countered. "And more importantly, you had no authority to sell them. You forged my signature on the transfer documents." Sheriff Cooper, a solid man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned forward. "Forgery is a serious criminal offense, Mr. Harper." "There must be some misunderstanding," Jackson said, his confident facade beginning to crack. "Dad and I have been working as partners in managing the ranch. He verbally authorized me to handle sales." "That's not true, and you know it," I replied firmly. I specifically told you those animals were not for sale." Franklin pulled out a folder containing the evidence we'd gathered. "We have documentation of multiple instances where you represented yourself as having authority you were not granted, including these sales documents where you forged your father's signature. And there's more," I added, steeling myself for what needed to be said. "We have video evidence of you attempting to alter legal documents related to ranch ownership." Sheriff Cooper's expression hardened. "That moves into potential criminal fraud territory, son." Jackson's face flushed with anger as he realized he'd been caught. "You've been spying on me? Your own son?" "I've been protecting what my brother entrusted to me," I corrected him. "Something I should have done from the moment you arrived with your true intentions poorly disguised." Franklin methodically laid out the evidence: the forged signatures, the video footage of Jackson discussing selling off portions of the ranch without authorization, the altered documents, and the witness statements from ranch hands who had been given conflicting instructions. As the evidence mounted, Natalie quietly slipped out of the room, returning moments later with her purse and car keys. The calculating look she gave Jackson spoke volumes. She hadn't signed up for legal complications. "I think I'll go into town for some shopping," she announced to no one in particular, not making eye contact with any of us. Jackson didn't even acknowledge her departure, too focused on the unraveling of his plans. When the front door closed behind her, something in him seemed to snap. The mask of the dutiful son fell away completely, replaced by naked rage. "You think you can handle all this?" he spat, gesturing wildly around the room. "You're a construction worker, Dad. A laborer. You have no idea how to manage wealth or property of this magnitude. I was trying to save you from yourself by stealing what was entrusted to me." I kept my voice level despite the pain his words caused. "By undermining everything Harold built, Uncle Harold was a fool to leave all this to you." Jackson was nearly shouting now. "You'll run it into the ground within a year without my help. All that money and land wasted because of your stubborn pride and outdated ideas." Sheriff Cooper stood up, his presence immediately commanding the room. "That's enough, Mr. Harper. I think we've heard all we need to hear about your intentions." Jackson looked from the sheriff to Franklin to me, suddenly realizing how completely his position had collapsed. When he spoke again, his tone shifted to desperate pleading. "Dad, you can't do this. I'm your son. Your only family now. We can work something out between us without involving lawyers and police." The manipulation was so transparent now that I wondered how I could have harbored any hope of genuine reconciliation. "You stopped being family to me 10 years ago, Jackson. Your only interest in me now is what you might gain financially." Franklin cleared his throat. "Dominic, as your legal counsel, I recommend we give your son a choice. He can leave the property immediately and cease all attempts to interfere with ranch operations, or Sheriff Cooper can proceed with formal charges based on the evidence we've collected." Sheriff Cooper nodded in agreement. "Given the family relationship, I'd prefer to handle this without formal charges if possible, but that depends entirely on your son's cooperation moving forward." I looked at Jackson, this stranger wearing my son's face, and felt a complex mixture of grief, disappointment, and resolve. "Those are your options, Jackson. Leave now and stay away, or face the legal consequences of what you've done." For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize, might show some genuine remorse that could salvage the smallest piece of our relationship. Instead, his expression hardened into cold contempt. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "When you're alone and failing at running this place, you'll wish you had accepted my help. But don't expect me to come back when you finally realize you can't do this alone." "I'm not alone," I replied, looking to Franklin, and thinking of Hank and the loyal ranch staff who had stood by me. "I have people I can trust. That makes all the difference." Jackson stormed out to pack his belongings, making as much noise as possible and slamming doors along the way. Sheriff Cooper stayed until Jackson had loaded his luggage into his rental SUV, ensuring there were no further confrontations. As Jackson prepared to drive away, he rolled down his window for one final attempt. "This is all I wanted, Dad," he said, his voice suddenly soft and wounded. "Just to help you, to be part of your life again. Why couldn't you trust me? For a brief moment, I almost wavered, the parental instinct to believe the best of my child nearly overwhelming my better judgment. But then I remembered the overheard phone calls, the forged signatures, the secret meetings with buyers, all conducted behind my back. Trust is earned, Jackson. It's built through honesty and respect, neither of which you've shown since you arrived. If you ever want a genuine relationship with me, it needs to start with the truth, not with schemes to take what isn't yours. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I thought I glimpsed a flicker of something genuine, perhaps regret or even shame. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a cold mask as he put the car in gear and drove away without another word. I stood in the driveway long after the dust from his departure had settled, feeling an odd mixture of loss and liberation. The son I had longed to reconnect with was truly gone, perhaps had been for many years. But with that painful recognition came the freedom to move forward without false hope or misplaced trust. Franklin placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Dominic. Harold would be proud of how you protected what he built. As I watched the empty road where Jackson's car had disappeared, I silently promised my brother that I would continue to honor his legacy, not just by preserving what he had created, but by building upon it in ways that stayed true to his values and vision. The confrontation had been painful, but necessary. Now the real work of making this ranch truly mine could begin. The house felt eerily quiet in the days following Jackson's departure. Despite the tension of his presence, his absence left a palpable void that echoed through the large rooms. Natalie never returned from her shopping trip, sending a moving company a week later to collect the few belongings they had left behind. I found myself experiencing a confusing mix of emotions. Relief that the immediate threat to the ranch was gone, sadness over the finality of the break with my son, and a strange sense of liberation now that I could focus fully on honoring Harold's legacy without interference. Gonna be all right? Hank asked me one evening as we sat on the porch after a long day of work. I think so, I replied honestly. Not the way I would have chosen things to go with my only child, but maybe it was inevitable given the path we've been on for years. Hank nodded, a man of few words but deep understanding. Family's complicated. Sometimes the hardest part is accepting what can't be fixed, at least not right away. His simple wisdom resonated with me. Perhaps that was the first lesson in this painful chapter. Accepting that some relationships can't be forced or fixed through sheer will, especially when the other person isn't approaching with honesty. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into learning every aspect of ranch operations. With Jackson's manipulative presence gone, the ranch staff relaxed noticeably, becoming more open with their knowledge and suggestions. I made it clear that, while I might be new to ranching, I valued their expertise and wanted to learn from them rather than impose my own inexperienced ideas. Surprisingly, my construction background proved increasingly valuable. When one of the older barns needed structural reinforcement, I worked alongside the crew, showing them techniques I had used in building construction that could be adapted for the historical structure. My practical problem-solving approach earned respect that theoretical knowledge alone might never have achieved. 3 months after taking over the ranch, I implemented my first significant innovation. Having noticed the high cost and inefficiency of the current irrigation system, I designed a new approach that incorporated rainwater collection and reduced water waste by nearly 30%. The success of this project gave me confidence to try other improvements where my experience offered fresh perspective. Harold would have liked this, Hank commented, as we surveyed the completed irrigation upgrade. He appreciated practical solutions, especially ones that were good stewardship of the land. That conversation sparked an idea. Many of the young ranch hands had impressive practical skills but limited opportunities for advancement. Drawing on my years in construction training new workers, I established a small training program that rotated interested staff through different aspects of ranch operations: animal husbandry, equipment maintenance, land management, and basic business planning. Giving people a path forward, I explained to Franklin when he visited to help formalize the program. Everyone deserves a chance to grow their skills and take on more responsibility if they want it. 6 months into my new role as ranch owner, I discovered a leather-bound journal in Harold's desk that I had somehow missed during my initial exploration. The journal contained not just business notes, but his personal reflections on the ranch's purpose and his hopes for its future. One entry in particular struck me deeply. The Rocking H isn't just about raising cattle or making money. It's about stewardship of this land that our grandfather claimed and our father nurtured. It's about creating something meaningful that supports not just our family, but the families of everyone who works here. Success isn't measured in dollars, but in sustainability, in leaving things better than we found them. Reading Harold's words crystallized something I had been feeling but couldn't articulate. The ranch wasn't just a business or property. It was a living community with purpose and meaning beyond profit. This realization shaped my decisions moving forward, helping me evaluate choices based not just on financial outcomes but on their impact on the land, animals, and people who depended on the ranch. 8 months after Jackson's dramatic exit, a letter arrived with a Chicago postmark. I recognized the handwriting immediately, and my hands trembled slightly as I opened it. "Dad," it began simply, "I've been doing some thinking these past months. I won't make excuses for my behavior at the ranch. It was wrong, driven by financial problems I'd created for myself and refused to face honestly. Seeing all that wealth triggered something ugly in me, something I'm not proud of." The letter continued, explaining that Jackson had begun seeing a therapist to work through his issues with money, status, and our complicated relationship. There was no direct ask for forgiveness, no request to return, just an acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a stated commitment to personal change. "I don't expect this to fix anything between us," the letter concluded. "But I thought you deserved to know that I recognize the harm I tried to cause, and I'm working to become someone better." I read the letter several times, wary of yet another manipulation, but detecting something that seemed genuinely different in tone from anything I'd seen from Jackson in years. After careful consideration, I sent a brief response, acknowledging his letter and expressing hope for his continued self-reflection, while maintaining clear boundaries about our relationship and the ranch. This exchange began a very cautious, limited correspondence over the following months. I neither fully trusted nor fully rejected these tentative steps toward reconciliation, choosing instead to proceed with careful optimism while focusing primarily on my responsibilities to the ranch. 1 year after Harold's passing, I organized a small gathering at the ranch to commemorate both his life and the journey we had all taken since his death. The entire staff attended, along with Franklin, some neighboring ranchers who had been Harold's friends, and community members who had supported me during the transition. Standing on the porch addressing this group of people who had become my community, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced since my early days in construction, when I was part of a crew building something meaningful together. A year ago, I knew nothing about ranching, I told them honestly. I was overwhelmed by the responsibility Harold placed on my shoulders and doubtful of my ability to honor his legacy. Many of you probably shared those doubts, though you were too kind to say so. This drew knowing chuckles from the group. What I've learned this year isn't just about cattle breeding or land management, though those lessons were important. The most valuable lesson was about trusting myself to face challenges I never anticipated, and about recognizing that none of us succeeds entirely alone. I raised my glass in a toast. To Harold, who saw potential in me that I couldn't see myself, and to all of you, who gave me the chance to prove him right. As I looked out at the land stretching toward the mountains, at the healthy cattle grazing in pastures that had sustained generations, at the faces of people who had become not just colleagues but friends, I felt a deep sense of peace. The pain of Jackson's betrayal remained, a scar that might never fully heal, but it no longer defined my story. The true inheritance Harold had left me wasn't the land or money. It was the opportunity to discover my own capacity for growth, resilience, and leadership. It was the chance to build something meaningful that extended beyond my own life, just as he had done. Perhaps that's the most important legacy any of us can hope for. Not just the material possessions we leave behind, but the positive impact we have on the land we steward and the lives we touch along the way. It's a lesson I continue to learn every day, as I wake up in my brother's house, now truly my own, and face each new challenge with the confidence he always believed I possessed. What legacy are you building in your own life? Is it measured in dollars and possessions, or in the positive impact you have on those around you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember that it's never too late to discover strength you never knew you had.